Bend Around the Wind by Skylia. Chapter 85, Symphony of Chaos. The edge of the barrier was well beyond the city borders. They couldn't warn all humans in time before it solidified, so the dozens of car wreckages on both sides of the dome was not an unexpected sight. It was also not surprising that as soon as the helicarrier got close enough, the other's ship descended from its position to hover right above the city half inside the dome. Loki informed Fury that it was useless to stay away and out of sight. The helicarrier was not equipped with the necessary technology to hide from a ship like the others. It was already fortunate that the Iron Mage remained undetected. He was too far away from the city to be able to judge the extent of the chaos that had to be within the barrier. The more time passed, the more desperate the humans would become, and no one should underestimate the amount of damage an angry and terrified mass of people could do. Loki's invasion would be nothing compared to this if it all spiraled out of control. Time was of the essence. The other was too arrogant to let the opportunity of getting his hands on Loki again go. No doubt his master was displeased with him after Loki and Stark managed to escape from his clutches. Was he searching for them all this time? He came here alone. That became more and more evident. Did he lose his good graces with Thanos? Was he furious and desperate to prove his worth again? Did Thanos send him, or did he come on his own? Loki reminded himself of these questions as they marched towards the barrier. Fury and his armed agents were a solid presence at his back, but he did not pay them much attention. He focused his mind on his options. Unfortunately, once he was inside, he was going to be extremely limited. Hatchet and Stark voiced their hatred for his plan several times over the past couple of hours it took the Avengers to get here. The two of them agreeing this much about something was not as big a novelty as it used to be. Quite the contrary, they tended to be very much in agreement when it came to Loki. It was more disconcerting when Drongo voiced his disapproval, but even he couldn't change Loki's mind. They were all hypocrites, Loki included. If Stark or Hatchet would have been suitable to do this, they would have volunteered more than willingly. And of course, Loki would have been the one to be incredibly angry at them for putting themselves in danger. These exact reasons silenced them in the end. If the tables had been turned, things would have been exactly the same. They would have argued for a while, let their worry spiral into anger and frustration, and then finally they would have agreed that the proposed course of action was necessary, no matter how dangerous it was. "Let's chase the third back," Fury said, probably only out of courtesy, because he obviously supported the plan more than anyone else. He had not much to lose and only to gain, after all. Or maybe he just enjoyed the sight of Loki in chains. "I think it is a little too late for that," Loki said, turning his gaze towards the city. The chariots that approached them with rapid speed were very similar to the ones the Chitauri used. Right at the front was the familiar dark shape of the other. His dark cloak was billowing in the wind, but his hood somehow remained in place. Loki felt his shoulders stiffen, more in anger than in fear. He never feared the other, not truly. It was Thanos that always filled his stomach with cold dread, not his despicable waste of space minion. Loki glanced around quickly to look at what sort of henchmen the other recruited this time. They were tall and pink, that much he could see from afar. He did not recognize what race they belonged to, but the pointed ears on the top of their heads and the almost obscenely upturned round noses in the middle of their white faces was not a sight he was happy to see. They landed not that far away from Loki and Fury, stepping off the chariots swiftly. It was simple to spot that the other's soldiers were not used to the advanced weapons they were carrying. Their grip was too tight and awkward, and they only had 2 fingers on each arm, so the guns were clearly not designed with their anatomy in mind. The other must have picked them up on his way here. They did not look like mercenaries, so they were likely promised something else for their services. What it couldn't be, Loki did not care to guess. He had more important things to keep his attention on. The other stepped off his chariot last, like a conquering general. Loki resisted the urge to bristle at the sight. Thanos' dog would deeply regret he ever set foot in this realm, that he ever crossed Loki's path in the first place. He would curse the day it happened before the life finally slipped out of him, and it was going to happen by Loki's hand. He was going to stand above him and watch, make sure it was his face the other saw last. "I asked for them both," was the first thing the other said. He didn't even glance at Loki, dismissed his presence without acknowledging him. A few years ago, something like this would have angered him considerably more. Now he had to fake the heat in his gaze the other undoubtedly saw from the corner of his eye. "You get this one," Fury replied smoothly. "I will extend my stay then, until I have the other one," the other told him. Fury probably glared at him in return, but also played the role of the intimidated human and said nothing. Then the other finally turned to look at Loki. He was still wearing the clothes he put on to impersonate Barton because his armor would have made him look less vulnerable. Despite the difference in their appearance, they were on even ground. No matter how intimidating the other wanted to seem with his dark cloak and silver mask, Loki was unfazed. "Godling," he drawled. "You really thought you could escape?" "I did escape," Loki said. "Not for long. Never for long," the other said, stepping closer. He looked down at the shackles Loki had on his wrists, probably contemplating how securely he was trapped. "And again beaten by simple mortals." He paused, considering the agents around them. "How exactly did they do it this time?" "We had good leverage," Fury answered. "A weakness, then," the other concluded. "Exploited so easily." Loki glared at him steadily. He did not have to fake his anger, for he despised him on the most profound level. Oh, how much joy he was going to take from his death when it finally came. "Bring me the other one. Stuck," the other said. "Then you'll get your city back." Such an obvious lie. He would rather level the city to the ground and kill every single human inside the barrier. It did not matter whether his demands were fulfilled. Fury still played his role perfectly. His position as the leader of S.H.I.E.L.D. sometimes made Loki almost forget that he was a skilled spy himself, someone very much capable of deception. Fury gritted his teeth in visible anger and looked away from the other as if cowed. "We're searching for him," he said a tad more quietly. "Search faster," the other ordered, then beckoned his henchmen to take Loki away from the agents. He was yanked forward harshly, but he held his balance easily, not giving them the satisfaction of allowing himself to be dragged forward like a dog on a leash. They pulled him towards the chariots. He hoped they would take him into the city and not directly to the ship, but it was just a slight inconvenience. It didn't change much about his plan. He did glance back at Fury one last time as he was shoved forward to step on a chariot. He did not like or trust the man, but the Norns always had a strange sense of humor when it came to giving Loki allies. At least he did not have to put too much faith in Fury. He knew that somewhere not that far, above the clouds hidden from sight, Stark was waiting to strike. Loki never understood the need to be constantly surrounded by darkness. He knew when it was necessary to be hidden by shadows, but there was a fine line between being nightmare-inducing and ridiculously overdramatic. And the inside of this ship was as dark and gloomy as Loki would have expected from the other. The henchmen looked out of place with their pink skin and ill-fitting clothing, colorful spots in the dark corridors. If it would have been Loki, he would have made the inside of the ship more regal and breathtaking. This ship gave the impression of a dirty cave. Yes, many feared the darkness, but more feared power. Loki had only seen Thanos' ship, the Dementor, once, but he would never forget, for it was a sight to behold, a magnificent, over 2,000 feet long, azure green vessel. That was something to look upon with fear and awe. The other's ship, in comparison, was a piece of hovering rock. After some walking, they've arrived to a secluded part of the ship, even darker than the corridors below, if that was even possible. There was no one in sight. Everything was empty and silent. He was shoved forward into a big nook in the wall, an oversized box really, only a couple of feet wide and deep, but tall enough that Loki couldn't reach the ceiling. "You think me a fool, godling," the other said as Loki straightened up and turned around. A shimmering force field appeared almost immediately, bringing some light to the darkened room and effectively cutting Loki off from the rest of the chamber. "Quite so," Loki agreed. "Why deny it? The other was dangerous, and mayhap he was not a complete simpleton, but he also did not have the brightest of minds." His answer plainly angered the other quite a lot. He hissed quietly. "I will teach you a lesson one last time before you die, and maybe you'll finally learn." "Speak all you want," Loki scoffed. The other sneered. "You slippery snake, always just hide behind your betters, waiting for scraps to be tossed your way." Loki smiled. "And where is your puppeteer?" he asked. "You surround yourself with scoundrels, but you are on your own, aren't you? Did your master finally toss you away? One too many failures? After all, you couldn't even get information out of one mortal man, let alone me." The other marched up to the transparent barrier. "You will pay," he hissed, "and then I will finish what you couldn't." Loki laughed at him. "To prove your worth? Fool! If it would be a matter of coming here like this, your master would have already done it. You sealed your fate. You just don't know it yet." The other looked at the small room Loki was standing in. "I believe it is your fate that has been decided," he said. "You can try." Loki grinned again. "Try all you want, but you will never be able to make me fear you." "I made you fear me before," the other shot back, and it just made Loki laugh harder. "No, the only one I feared was your master, never you." The other made an attempt to move forward before remembering himself and taking a step back and turning to leave. "What did you promise the mortals?" Loki asked him loudly. "What was the price of the help you so desperately needed? What were you possibly capable of offering?" A little insult, a little arrogance. Of course it made the other stop and turn back around to face him again. "Oh, they were promised the same price you were," the other said. "Their lives, and that they will rule over all humans who survive. Their ambitions were just as laughable as yours." "But you don't intend to let anyone live," Loki guessed. "There's no promise to fulfill if there is nothing left to rule," the other said with a wide smile. "I'll let you watch me succeed where you failed, then I'll snap your neck myself." He briskly walked out, his dark cloak swirling around his legs, his henchmen following him closely. No guards were left in the room with him, but there were certainly some outside the door. These creatures the other surrounded himself with were definitely not soldiers given to him by Thanos, so this attack couldn't be the Mad Titan's design. The other had a more personal vendetta. But did he lose his master's favor completely? Had he been cast aside with nowhere to return to? A man with nothing to lose was a more dangerous foe than someone simply following his ambitions or some of his other greedy instincts. A light tickling feeling by his nape reminded him that he had other things to worry about. "We are alone. You can come out," he said quietly. There was some movement as the back of his neck, tiny feet pulling at his hair by the very root of his braid. The most suitable help he could wish for in the small shape of a shrew. It was a lot easier to sneak him inside than Loki expected. He held his hand up to his shoulder and Oakbud climbed over to his palm. In this shape, he was tiny and brown, looking like any other shrew, really. It was almost impossible to notice that he was a fae in disguise. Asking for such a great favor from a fae, even if it was a gnome, was not something Loki was used to do. His short trip to LA did not promise to be successful at first. After all, he already asked his new allies for a lot of favors. Pillskin shook his head immediately when Loki explained what he needed help with, but Oakbud just gasped and told him he had friends who lived in the zoo here in San Diego. He agreed readily enough to come with Loki despite the danger. Loki started to grow fond of the little fellow. "Can you still get out of here?" Loki asked. The gnome did not shift back, just stood up on his hind legs and nodded enthusiastically. Find as many Fae as you can and take about the center of the barrier, Loki said. It should be easy enough to find it. I don't know how quickly I can create a diversion, but as soon as you damage the barrier enough, help will come from the outside. Oakbud lifted one of his tiny paws to his head in what had to be some sort of salute. Then he popped out of sight, teleporting away from the ship. Oakbud had assured him that there were plenty of Fae in the city who were probably rather angry about being locked inside. But of course he couldn't let the Fae fight on their own. The barrier could be damaged significantly from the inside out once the Fae found the center of it. At least enough to make it penetrable again, but the ship would still be a problem. Loki looked around in his tiny cell and let his mind roam with possibilities. He needed to do more than just a little mischief. He needed to cause mayhem. On the edge of madness, when his mind was nearly shattered, his body constantly weak and tired, there was no chance for him to weave powerful magic. That is why the other never witnessed the full extent of Loki's powers. Thanos was probably more aware of his skills, for he knew the Aesir and the other races of the Nine Realms and remembered what powers they could wield. The other was more ignorant, which was probably the reason why he did not switch the shackles Loki had on to ones that truly dampened his powers. Loki easily snapped them off his wrists and stepped closer to the translucent shield of energy that kept him in the cell. He didn't even need to touch it to know that attempting to physically cause the barrier would injure him horribly. If he had been more desperate, he would have tried to leave through it anyway. Fortunately, he was not that desperate. The walls hummed with the same sort of energy, the barrier itself, so it was clear that the same power was running through them, making it impossible to just tear them down. Oakbud easily teleported outside, but the way the Fae whisked away from places was very different from how Loki crossed distances with magic. He had no doubt that he could still slip out of his small prison. It would just drain him a little more than a normal shift in space. Nevertheless, he needed to escape, so there was not much to ponder on. As soon as his magic flared up, the barrier latched onto him like tendrils trying to keep him inside. It was too late to turn back, though. It was a repulsive sensation how two foreign energy intertwined with his own natural power. It wasn't alive and burning like the magic of others. It was cold and unnatural, an unhallowed mimicry of magic, an artificial mirage of something real and living. It was wrapping around him tightly, trying to reel him back in, locking him back inside. It became painful very soon. It strained his physical body as much as it strained his magic. He could feel it down to his bones, but Loki pushed forward, forcing his way out. When he finally tore himself away from it, he landed on the floor with a hard smack just outside of his cage, barely biting back a loud cry of pain. Those tendrils of power tore at his very core. He panted loudly, his chest heaving unpleasantly, and he felt like he was going to empty his stomach any second now. He shivered a little, and that was what worried him the most. He never got cold, after all. He pulled himself to his feet after a few moments. He was a little unsteady, but still strong enough. He could still feel the phantom touch of the cage, as if something left ugly burns on his skin, even though there were no visible marks. He glanced back at the little cell. It did not feel so vicious now that he was out of its clutches. It was again just that barely there thrum of energy. How did the gnome escape so easily? It did not react to Oakbud's magic like this, only to Loki's. He pushed away the thoughts about it, what it could mean, because he had more important things to do and had no time to consider the implications. He had to help the Fae. He took a large steadying breath, shaking off the last after effects of his escape. Only a fool would have tried to leave through the door, where most likely guards stood. Fortunately, now that he was out of his prison, he could teleport to his heart's content. It was a little painful. Not something that truly hurt, but like he was tired and sore. If he had more time, he would have been very curious about what sort of technology was capable of doing something like this. Act like living magic without being that. He would search for answers another time. There was no room for curiosity just yet. The layout of the ship was unknown to him, but searching for something quietly and efficiently was always one of his strengths. He knew he did not have much time before he had to do something drastic enough that could serve as a suitable distraction, something that would avert all eyes from what was going on with the barrier down below in the city. Everyone must have been extremely impatient by now on the outside, eager to strike and move into the city, march against the other and his troops. Not even Loki himself knew how many soldiers there were in the city itself, whether the other kept his henchmen on his ship or scattered them down on the ground at important locations. They would all find out soon enough. It took some time, but he found a room that must have been connected to some of the generators and the inner systems of the ship. It wasn't a very large room, but had plenty of important-looking technology crammed in it. Loki slipped inside, careful not to be seen by anyone just yet. That's where his carefulness ended, though, because as soon as he was inside, he started to destroy. He tore cables out from under their metal covering, broke and twisted tubes that ran down the wall. He smashed some screens, everything he could get his hands on. Wires flew in every direction, and soon the room was filled with sparks and the smell of burnt plastic. It was only when he yanked a full control box out of the wall that an alarm started blaring. Magic burnt in his hands, and he let a couple of blasts go, aiming at the rest of the towering machines. He could truly start causing damage now that he was discovered anyway. He only slipped away from the room when he heard heavy feet running towards him. An exciting game of tag it was what started. Loki slipped from room to room, corridor to corridor, keeping his eyes and ears open and always hiding before the other's henchmen could catch sight of him. Certainly, he could have taken down the whole lot of them, but he much preferred to do damage to the ship than to fight the useless cannon fodder. The alarm was loud and jarring. It would have annoyed Loki if it wasn't the proof of his job well done. Indeed, it was more like music to his ears. A real symphony of chaos it was. The screeching alarm, the angry shouts of the soldiers, and the thudding of heavy feet trying and failing to chase him. At one point, he accidentally ended up at what must have been the personal quarters of the crew. Nothing overly important was found in the vicinity, but he still broke the water pipes on the ceiling. In only a matter of seconds, cold water started pouring down everywhere, flooding the rooms. Loki followed the pipes and broke them here and there, giving some of the corridors the same treatment. And if he exposed some wires on the flooded corridors until sparks were flying everywhere, well, that was just a shocking cherry on top of his little mayhem cake. He resisted the urge to laugh out loud or cackle like a madman. It's been truly too long since he could just break and shatter and destroy everything he got his hands on. Chaos had two sides, creation and destruction. He had done a lot more of the former than the latter in recent years. It was time he had the chance to indulge his more destructive instincts, follow his darker nature in the most delightful of ways. He knew that he had not done any significant damage to the battleship yet, but that was not the point. He just needed to keep the attention of everyone on the ship, especially that of the others. Finally, he reached something that was a lot more important than any of the areas he already half destroyed. It was one of the generator rooms. Not just a smaller control room that was somewhat connected to it. This had one of the main generators inside. If Loki was able to shut it down, the barrier surrounding the city might fall immediately. Or if he managed to do some considerable damage to it, he might be able to take down the ship itself. He swiftly looked around the room, already searching for the right way to start, but when he took a step forward, he felt the same cold and unnatural surge of power his cell was made of, all around himself. It was different, stronger, sharper, more powerful than the little cage was. It didn't just latch onto him, it engulfed him, suffocating him like he was a candle that did not have enough air to burn. He screamed when he tried to escape its hold because it did not let go, and the pain was much more intense than before. He fell to his knees at some point, but it barely registered. He fought as hard as he could. His magic burnt, trashed like a chained beast. He tried fighting it with everything he could think of, but no matter what he tried, the power would not let up. It was like drowning and falling at the same time, being pulled down into the endless darkness of a wormhole. He shouted, he screamed, but he just kept falling and falling. "You think me a fool, godling," the other's voice whispered viciously. It was the last thing he heard before it all went dark and silent.